Afternoon. It's now afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this SAFMA webinar. A very topical one, I think. Certainly by the responses we've had for the registrations, very topical. A lot of interest. But before we kick off with the webinar, let's just we note that today was Friday the 13th. First of all, so we hope that people are not superstitious of surviving the day. But secondly, this is the launch for the 2022 SAFMA conference, and it's going to be held on the 8th and 9th. And if you see me looking down, I'm looking at my notes. 8th and 9th of September, and the topic is Back to the Future, which really is very much aligned with the topic for today. So the launch, put it in your diaries, 8th and 9th of September. It'll be a hybrid conference. You can attend or take it on virtual. And the venue is Obi Hotel Golf and Spa in George. So take your golf clubs. It's our annual golf day as well at the George Golf Course on the 7th. So we are certainly lining up an exciting event there with the golf and the conference down in George. And then the second bit is the absolute good news that we've got that Redefine, who were the winners of the SAFMA FM Excellence for the 2022 with the runner-up of Bidvest. And Bidvest are the sponsors of this webinar. So thank you to Bidvest, but Redefine were the winners, and SAFMA then put those two submissions forward to Global FM, and Redefine won. So Redefine, as submitted by SAFMA, won the Global FM Award for Excellence in 2022, up against FM submissions from around the world. So anyone that says FM in South Africa is trailing, not up to speed, we are, trailing the rest of the world. Sorry, guys. We've just won FM Excellence for, as measured by our peers, Global FM for 2022. We're not trailing, we're leading. So I think that if you're interested, go on the website, see the award, see what was done, and as people will tell you, the standard of the submissions is really good, and full marks, and well done to Redefine, and thank you to Bidvest, but certainly as SAFMA, we're very chuffed, and that's a great point for SAFMA, for Redefine, and South Africa, in fact. And you're part of an industry that leads in excellence globally. Right, going forward, we've now got Dr. Steenkamp, Dr. JO Steenkamp, a psychologist, a practicing clinical psychologist, who's going to explore the understanding of what is happening and why people are feeling the way they do. Now, we've had COVID, we've got people that have gone out of office, back into office, and some people are not feeling psychologically, mentally that great, a bit tired. They don't know whether it's a hangover from COVID, it's just an ordinary hangover, or whether it's something psychological. Now, this is not my forte, as everyone will know. Being a good engineer, this sort of stuff is way out of my area. So we're glad to have Dr. JO with us, 30 years dealing with trauma, but he's not witnessed such a lack of resilience and its consequences so early in the year. So the way we're going to run this is anyone that was expecting a barrage of slides, got bad news for you. No death by PowerPoint on this one. We're going to have a conversation, but we're going to start with Dr. JO setting the platform for the conversation, setting the background, and this is going to be set at a level that I'll understand it as a non-medical person, it's some of the information or most of the information is based out of his hard experience practicing in the market. So it's not a theoretical academic discussion. This is about the hard practice. So Dr. Joe, I think at this stage, let's hand over to you to set up that platform for the conversation that we're going to have a bit as we go through in this webinar. Over to you.
Thank you, John. First of all, welcome to everybody. And John, I really appreciate that you logged on to this so quickly. And of course, I'd like to say to Marianne Boertes, who you can't see at the moment, who's in the background doing all the technical stuff, that she actually initiated this whole process. And then, of course, to Siga Modupu, who's also in the background there somewhere helping Marianne. Thank you for being there. I'm going to start off with Tony. Now, Tony came to see me, and Tony was at that stage busy separating from his wife. And so Tony decided, a very, very wealthy businessman, decided to streamline his life and to buy a lock-up and go. And so Tony did that, and as he got his lock-up and go, he had all this excess stuff in his life, and he started getting rid of it. And so one day, Tony walked into my office with a little suitcase, and I hope you can see this little suitcase. I don't know if it's too white, but let me put it like this, and you can see it better. Right. And then Tony put the suitcase on my desk, and I thought, because Tony is such a wealthy man that he got half of his Kruger rands and he decided to streamline. So give me half and, you know, we've got a good life going. And then Tony said to me, it's a sextant that he's putting on my table and I might find it interesting. And, you know, in 37 years of private practice, I've done many sexual consultations, but I've never worked on a sextant. And so I found that quite intriguing. And then Tony said to me, but open it. And which I then did. I opened this little suitcase, and inside of the suitcase, there was this thing. Now, I mean, this got my imagination going. I've got to just do this so that you can see it because the background distorts it. And then Tony broke my enthusiasm a bit, saying to me, this is a navigation instrument. And with this sextant, which is now being replaced by the GPS, you can, as a sailor, pinpoint your exact location on the globe within about 7 meters. And then if you have a map of the globe with all those horizontal lines and all those things on, you can actually see exactly where you are. So it gives you a point of reference, what the compass does. So you use the, by the way, you use the sun and you use the moon and all the lights and kind of stuff to pinpoint yourself with this weird and wonderful little instrument. And so it gives you the location. What the compass does, it gives you direction, but not the location. Then Tony said to me, himself being a sailor, that he trains people in navigation. And one of the questions he would ask them is, what is the most important thing when you go on your journey at sea? And then they would say fresh water, they would say warm clothes, food, and so on. And then he would say, no. The most important thing is to know where you are. Because if you know where you are, you know where you can go to. If you know where you are, you know where you can go to. That's such an important statement. I'm going to expand on that and then eventually return to that. In the end, we have points of references within ourselves. This is an external point of reference somewhere on the globe that you can then decide how to do your journey. This is where you are. You've got about 200 kilometers to go, then you'll reach Australia and so on and so on. One of our internal points of references would be a coping style that we develop in the first round about 9 years of life. And there are many different coping styles. There's a pleaser, a performer, a martyr, a fighter, a warrior, an observer, a fixer, a chameleon, a savior, a joker, and so on and so on. And we develop these coping styles in an effort to have a certain identity so that we have a place in the world. And through trial and error, we then get conditioned to do some things more and let other things go. So if I am a pleaser one day, and that's my coping style, my function of my coping style would be to work so hard at pleasing people that they don't reject me. So the internal reference point of being a pleaser that I ground comfortably into becomes a way to regulate my external world so that I influence people's way of perceiving me in such a manner that they would react to me in a specific way and not reject me. In other words, this is a conscious control, but it becomes such a default that we start forgetting that we're actually doing it. Then we have another internal point of reference, and that is an autonomic regulatory process. Remember, the coping style I said is a conscious thing that we do. The autonomic regulation sits in a part of your neural structure and keeps on regulating you to be in what we refer to as a space of tolerance. If you have two lines, then you have to live within this space of tolerance to keep on living. The majority of us would know at this stage that your average temperature is 36.4 degrees. Right. And if you then increase that temperature, you start sweating, you play squash, you start sweating because you need to cool down, otherwise you will blow the fuse. And so your sweating is an autonomic process that regulates you back into the space of tolerance so that you don't overheat and that you don't die. Similarly, if you're cold and you start shivering, it's waking up that internal energy so that you feel warmer and that you keep on living. We have a neural system, we have a respiratory system, we have a digestive system, we have a skin system, an endocrine system, and so on. And these systems all work together to keep us alive and to have this internal point of reference of a state of flow. Okay, so let me just say that again. Our conscious coping style is to regulate the external world so that I feel okay. Our unconscious coping style is an auto-corrective process that happens by itself without me even thinking about it, and it's happening to you right at this very moment. Your system is regulating all the time. I'd like to explain it to you. Let's just see if I can get this so that you can see it without the background distorting us. Let's say this is you. Okay, you are standing at the robot and you've got these earphones on and you're listening to some really good rock music. And the little man on the opposite side on the robot is red. And the moment it turns green, you go. And someone then pulls you behind, pulls you back, and a truck comes past and you would have been mincemeat. And in that moment, what happened? Your whole body was activated and it goes in a state of panic and your heart pounds and you have short breath and you're sweating and. And while you're walking towards work, your body regulates itself eventually and you are back in a state of flow. Happens automatically. To explain something like trauma, we need to understand that the same thing happens, but with trauma, we have a feeling of powerlessness to change the outcome of the situation. Something happens at my expense, and then I have a sense of powerlessness to change it. For instance, I'm activated by an external event, but this cannot take place. The autonomic regulation can't take place, and this feeling goes on hold. It kind of freezes in your system. And if this happened to you when you were 3 years old, and you are 93 today, you still need to do that. It is stuck in your system. So trauma is a response that never completed. We've received information, but the system can't autonomically regulate all of that. So there's information that is stuck. In other words, if you take your cell phone out when you're watching an athlete running and you take a photo, then on that photo, you freeze a moment. If you go home and you can actually get that picture to move again, you'll find that the hind leg of the athlete will now go forward. and the forward leg will now be at the back. In other words, the movement, the expectation that we have of the athlete is that that hind leg will go forward. It's an expectation of something that still needs to happen. If we take a wave at sea, and the wave goes through 70% of its motion, goes through the roll and it crashes everything, but 30% of that wave has not gone through it. It goes up and it freezes there. That 30% still needs to complete the motion, but it's frozen. If we experience stuff, the 70% that we've experienced, the uncomfortable stuff, that is complete, it's done, it's over, it's in memory, it's long, it's gone. Whereas the 30%, that is a too muchness and have a defenselessness, a powerlessness to change it, is the trauma. The trauma is the feeling that still needs to complete itself. That is a too muchness feeling. It was disconnected, and it will sometime, like the athlete's hind leg, start moving again. So without knowing it consciously, we have an expectation that this 30% that still needs to complete in my body, the action that is there, that is on hold, that still needs to do that, we have an expectation that it's going to happen sometime. But because we don't understand it, because it's in the conscious and the unconscious, we project it to the external world, and we start projecting to the external world that something's going to happen in the external world that doesn't feel so nice. In other words, we fear something that will make us feel uncomfortable, whether it's a feeling of shame, of not good enough, powerlessness, whatever it can be. So first of all, to understand that trauma is an incomplete response. It still needs to complete that. It's not what you felt, it's what you still need to feel. And the incomplete response will affect the choices we make because of our expectation that something like this uncomfortable feeling will happen. So it will affect the choices that we make and how we react to those choices. Right. How do we know that someone's got this kind of trauma? We know it because when a situation happens and their feelings, their reaction is disproportionate to the situation, it means they are still busy with an incomplete feeling that is projected onto the external experience, and they experience it more intense because of the internal feeling that they're carrying with them. So when an experience is disproportional to the event, we would say that person has developmental trauma. Now, developmental trauma is called developmental trauma because it happens in those early years. And I've not encountered someone that does not have an element or percentage of some kind of developmental trauma. Certain people just have more and some people have less. Now, what life does, life works in synchronistic fashions. And so what life does, it activates this developmental trauma through associations. Let me just first say, before I give you an example, that trauma upsets my point of reference, my internal point of reference. The moment I hold something, that internal flow state is now disrupted. Instead of flowing, it goes like this, goes like a spike pattern. Because of the expectation that something is going to happen potentially that still needs to happen inside of me, I have a vigilance. I don't have a spontaneity anymore. I have a distrust towards the environment. If something is on hold, if it's inside of me, it means it arrests some energy, some movement in my system. So let's say I have potentialities, and I like to explain it as simplistic as possible. Let's say I have 5 potentialities, which means I have 5 ways of combinations of these 5 fingers on how I can do life. I can do this, I can do this, I can show this to the speed cop, I can do this, and different things. So the combinations of how I would use these potentialities means I have 120 ways, because it's 1 times 2 times 3 times 4 times 5, 120 ways of how I can relate to the world. So very adaptable. Something happens, I can be a pleaser, or I can be a performer, or a chameleon, or a joker, whatever. What trauma does, it arrests a potentiality. Now it means I have 4 potentialities left. That means 1 times 2 times 3 times 4 is 24 ways of how I can relate to the world. That's one, that's one, that's one, that's one, but this one's gone. So from 120 possibilities, I'm down to 24. And so trauma narrows my world, my adaptability. And so if I have some more trauma and it closes a potentiality, I have 3 factorial, 1 times 2 times 3, it's 6 ways that I can relate to the world. So trauma arrests our potential to adapt better to life. Now, this is the thing. The moment we have those incomplete responses within us, it makes us susceptible to associative stuff. And I'm going to give you the example that the person allowed me to use this example. This is a man of 38 years old. He's a very good businessman. It's very easy to relate interpersonally. He then goes on a trip to Namibia with 5 vehicles. And somewhere on this trip in Namibia, he's driving on a hard, salt, straight, narrow road, black road. On the left-hand side, there's the mist from the sea coming and crossing the road. On the right-hand side, it's the black desert. He explains, as he drove into this mist on this straight, narrow, salt, hard road, he became so depressed that he started thinking of suicide from nowhere. Anyway, they finished the trip. He came back, and since then, he's been suffering from severe anxiety. He can't do this business thing anymore. He can't relate to other people anymore. We then started working, and it takes him back to when he was 3 years old. That's 35 years ago. He's standing in front of a maize field. Now, when you're 3 years old, the maize, that's quite high. And so he gets that same anxious feeling that he got post being in Namibia. And he then gets lost in the maize field. And he has that panic because he's so small that he can't see where he is. He's got no point of reference there. Eventually, the little dog finds him, and he follows the little dog out. As he exits the maize field, there's the farmhouse standing, and it's a white house with black window panes. Think of the white mist covering the road and the straight, narrow black road. And inside, his father is abusing his mother. So he can't go there, and he can't go back. And that powerlessness at the age of 3 years old just closed it up, pushed it into his system, and it was an incomplete response. And one day, 35 years down the line, really an insignificant situation associatively activated this old trauma. And this is the important part that I want you to remember. It opened the stuckness and started allowing it to complete, to heal. But because we don't understand it consciously what's happening, it felt to him that he's just in a state of panic. And what we try and do when we're in a state of panic, we try and get rid of it as quickly as possible. We're trying to focus on some point of reference. And the feeling that we usually use for that kind of thing is anger. Anger gives us a sense of control. We do something, we act on something. So a lot of people that are so angry are people that are extremely scared because they've got a lot of trauma that's trying to exit their system. How do we know that someone has a lot of developmental trauma, a lot of anger, a lot of fear, and a lot of hurt that they're carrying with themselves? If at work you see someone that's extremely irritable, you must know that they're beginning to be exposed, their vulnerability, and they're very, very, very close to an angry outburst because they're trying to get control back to shift us away from him or her so that that person feels safe again with distance. So that's developmental trauma that walks with us in life. It's something that's arrested. It's got to come out, and life has a way of stimulating it, and then we go into healing. Now, let's get back to 2022 and shock trauma. Shock trauma differs from developmental trauma. That shock trauma is now stuff that's happening in life at the moment. COVID was a shock. Someone passing away is a shock. Being in an accident is a shock. And we can go on with that kind of thing. So shock trauma usually is much more limited and doesn't affect our personality structure so that we become a pleaser or a performer or a martyr or an observer or so. It's supposedly less intense, and once it passes and we have some of that feeling left in our system, we call it, we have a PTSD. In other words, we have a post-reaction, post-traumatic stress reaction to what's happened fairly recently. And usually that's relatively easy working with a person like that. COVID, PTSD. In the 37 years that my wife and I have been in private practice, if you're that long in private practice, you see things, you see patterns, you make assumptions from those patterns. You see this happens in May, this happens in October, and you start planning your program accordingly. And in the beginning years, people used to, the 16th of December, you know, they were excited, they would get into the motor car, take their stuff, go down to the coast and have a great time. And then it started changing. People started becoming burnt out around about December. They were tired, and then they started becoming burnt out in November. And then October month became the month that we would associate with people feeling depleted and burnt out. So much so that we've started incorporating in practice the psychoeducation that we would say to people, October, end of November, beginning of October, take a week, weekend to weekend, go away and no technology stuff, and do that thing that would rejuvenate you so that when you return to work, you're in a good place, because the chaos of October, November, December, that we can just deal with that. Unlike someone who just took off between Christmas and New Year to catch up with work, sending out an email 2 o'clock this morning and getting getting a response from the other person. Now, that doesn't sound so good, does it? Then comes 2022. 2022, middle February, we saw the pattern already. Middle February, people told us that they're feeling like they normally tell us what they're feeling like in October. Now, I think that's about 8 months too soon. And since that time, that's what we've been hearing from about 75% of people coming to see us. I'm tired. Now, unfortunately, people are trying to make up for what they've lost with COVID. So they work harder to compensate. It also happens at schools. An extramural math teacher would say to me, you know, the children in primary school are tired, tired, tired. A teacher that knows me well, extramural for high school maths, contacts me and says, who can she send the pupils grade 9 and 10 to, because they're suffering from severe anxiety? A mother would say to me, a child needs to do a test before school, do school, after school, do a test, then do sport, then in the evening, 10 o'clock, sitting at his desk and his schoolwork, crying, saying, I can't anymore. A woman would say to me, you know, she used a mixer in a kitchen for something it wasn't intended to, and so it burnt out, and she feels a little bit like that. Someone else would say to me, I'm always the sunshine, and I know I can't get out of bed. And we hear it consistently, and it's getting worse. And so we are extremely concerned for 75% of people that are struggling, and 25% of that 75% is in severe distress. Now, let's just think of an example here. If you drive your motor car, nowadays we can go further with good fuel consumption. So from Pretoria to Colesberg, and somewhere along your journey, you hear a little squeaky sound of something. It's a little alarm, and a little light goes off, and you see, oops, I'm in the reserve tank. And you know, if you drive a good speed, that you have more or less 50 kilometers left. And so you look out for a petrol station, you refuel, and there you go. It's normal. In 2022, you're driving from Pretoria to Colesberg, and somewhere along the road, your motor dies. It's just depleted. There's no fuel. There was no warning signal. There's no little alarm going off, a little light going off, or an indicator that you're in the red. You are depleted. And this is the problem that we're finding with the 2 years of COVID. It ate up people's resilience because of the uncertainty, because of people losing that point of reference of what's going to happen tomorrow and where's this thing going. And then it's the first and then the third and the second, the third, the fourth. Now we're going to a fifth wave. We have become so devoid of a point of reference that our internal systems are being traumatized. It affects that grounding within ourselves, and we cannot rejuvenate. And the problem is that we do not know that we don't have resilience. So we feel fairly good. We started this year, we've survived as a species, and here we go. We get a little bump in the road, and we're flat. So 75% of people are struggling. And I'm going to give you another example to explain something that can exacerbate this condition. So someone in the ambassador field is in a foreign country, and in the beginning of COVID, she's into lockdown and she has to stay there, and she's in this apartment for months. And she starts becoming extremely depressed and extremely anxious. Eventually, we do a Skype session, I know her well, and it takes her, she's about 54 years old, it takes her to when she was about 4 years old, where she is diagnosed with some kind of heart valve problem, and she has to stay indoors, sit on the bed and read books and stuff. Through the window, she sees a little sister running around with friends and stuff, and she has a sense of powerlessness that she wants to participate, but she can't. She's not allowed to do exercise because her heart is going to stop. It's disconnected at that time. 50 years down the line, COVID and the isolation of COVID and the lockdown takes her back to that lockdown at that stage, and she becomes severely depressed. So current shock trauma can be exacerbated by old stuff. And now I want to say this again. What is happening is that old stuff is opening up. It's going into healing. It wants to heal. But because it's so consuming and so like a tsunami, we just lose it completely. So what do we stand to do? And I'm trying to do this as simplistic and as quickly as possible because it's such a lot of information that I want to get to you. We need to get two things right. We need to get an external point of reference right. And we need to get our internal point of reference right. So that we have that grounding internally and externally, that we part of this wheel in a particular way that we feel we are actually coping well. I want to tell you a story, short story quickly. I've told a lot of people this story because it's such a wonderful story. I've read in a book by Janja van der Post years ago when I was a child. He lived with Bushmen, and he writes a story about the Bushmen that annually go to the Holy Mountains. But the Bushman groups are small little tribes because they can't feed a lot of people, and so they have these little small little units dispersing, in the Kalahari and the Namib. And then once a year they start their trek towards the Holy Mountains. And as they're going, they might one day realize that this elderly person will not make it. And so that evening they have a feast, they celebrate this person, and then the next morning they leave that person with a little bit of food and they keep going. And that night at the new fireplace, they hear the messenger from the Holy Land, the leopard that came to fetch this elderly person. And so they keep on tracking, and then comes another one, and they realize they have to leave this person. They have a feast, they celebrate. The next morning they leave that person. And then one day they realize they have to leave this one person behind again. They do the same stuff, they feast, they celebrate. The next morning when they wake up, they see the Holy Mountains for the first time. And that person that was supposed to be left behind stands up and completes the journey. That person got a point of reference that gave that person hope. And energy follows intention. And that intention to make the journey, because there was a point of reference, allowed that person to continue and reach that destination. So I want to get to two things here when we think of this point of reference, and this thing that's happening to so many of us that's affecting our ability to have energy and resilience and to cope. The first thing I want to talk about concerning that is the concept of gratitude. We are so used to asking, and we so often forget to say thank you. When we rejuvenate, we have to look at what we have instead of what we don't have. There are simple things in life that are exceptionally important. Just a cup of coffee in the morning in the sun is a thank you moment. Sitting quietly and meditating, doing yoga, doing Pilates, sitting with a friend, being at work and just noticing something that's really nice. Small little things, small little steps are exceptionally important when we get to this place where we need to rejuvenate. And we have to ask ourselves, what are those things? What are those small things that rejuvenate us? Because they are the ones that's going to start building our energy. And then the second thing that goes with gratitude is compassion. It's one of the most important things is kindness. We need an avalanche of kindness. We don't need judgment. Don't judge people. How do we do kindness to ourselves? We need to self-nurture. We need to be kind to self. We need to do a lot of self-caring. In companies, we need to be aware that kindness is seeing someone for where they are. If someone is in a bad place, please do not do toxic positivity. It's the worst thing that you can do. What you need to do is to see the person for where they are now. If they are struggling, you have to say to them, I see that you are struggling. This is hard. You have to validate them, acknowledge them. Doesn't mean you have to go down into the deep darkness. It means that that person in their struggle needs someone to understand that it's not easy. Whether they've lost a loved one through COVID or something else, whether COVID's depleted them, whether they're struggling with long COVID. And let me tell you, those people struggling with long COVID, which is the COVID still in their body, not escaping the body, they are really struggling. It's hard for them. Do not try and make up for time lost. You can't. It's where we are now. If in a company, a part of the company is not functioning well and other people need now to compensate, they are also going to burn out. So our focus would need to be on people and where they are now. Profit will come if we invest in people. If it takes us 6 months longer, it is okay. We were in our time 2 years in the army compulsory. It didn't affect the fact that we became successful one day. It just took us 2 years longer. And we're still here and we still have quality. So if I can summarize the following, to say the majority of people are struggling with trauma. The majority of people have resilience problems. The majority of people don't know. And there's a 25% that is in severe distress. And they need sometimes a little bit of guidance to say, please go and see someone that can help you. Those 25% need to go to a professional. It's important, it's imperative that they go and see a professional psychologist. The other 50%, a lot of nurturing, a lot of kindness within the work environment would be really good for them. So what is the good news between all the struggle that I'm giving you? The good news is a lot of people are busy healing. They just don't know it. And with the right focus and the right Environment. John works a lot with creating environments. We do the same thing with the right environment that's created. Those people can release that stuff that's stuck with the shock trauma from COVID and maybe other stuff that's also there, and they can live quality life. But we need to be a little bit more patient than we used to be. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. I mean, that's a quite an eye-opener. The people asking questions, but let me grab the lead spot. So we were talking about rejuvenation, and then we were talking about, and what I was hearing and relating it back to, and it wasn't one of the questions you asked me, in the workspace. And what I'm hearing is in the workspace, we need peaceful spots or peace spots. And I can remember when I was stressed at times, at lunchtime, I would go and take a walk. And luckily we were in Houghton at the time, so I would just go and take a half-hour walk around Houghton on my own. And that allowed me, let's say, to gather myself from the morning and enable me to handle the afternoon. So from an FM point of view, you know, in some large corporations, they'll have a prayer room, and people might say, well, you know, why? But, you know, we talk about the environment, we have indoor plants, and, you know, many will look at the garden outside and say, well, you know, that's just a cost. But is it not a spot? What is it, and how should we be looking, and should we be putting the effort into creating can I say peace spots in the environment? And should we be looking at trying to improve or increase the level of peacefulness? And if that may be very sort of contradiction in terms within the environment. In other words, toning things, trying to tone things down. Maybe you'd like to comment on that from a facility point of view. I mean, we have a broad base of people. We've got the 100%, we've got 75% that are stressed, we've got 25% who are in trouble. Luckily, there's only you and me, so there's only two of us on that. So maybe you'd like to comment on that, just bringing it, and then we can look at some of the other questions if we've got that sort of time.
John, yes, thank you for the question. We have a very simplistic answer to that. Anything that can help is welcome. Space is really important to people. Workspace. It's interesting that with COVID, let me just add this, that 50% of people have gone into trauma because they are not in a work environment with colleagues. That's just an important point. 50% of people are actually quite okay at home. But there's a 50% that became depressed because they're not with colleagues. You know, there's background noise of colleagues all the time. They felt so alienated that alienation kind of ostracized them in such a way that they felt they don't belong anymore. So work environment for a lot of people is extremely important. I would be a massive advocator, a major advocator for those stuff that you are mentioning, prayer rooms, gardens, time to exit a bit, stand there in the sun, those kind of things. And there are different things for different people. Someone needs to go to a prayer room, light a candle. Someone else might need to sit in the sun. Someone else might want to just chat to a colleague. But those kind of spaces, you know, in the old days, we had the smoking room. It's like those kind of spaces would be really, really important. Yes. And you know what, when work environments do that, they're investing in people, and people know that. And you know, if people know that the work is investing in them and their psychobiological health, they are being validated. They'll give it back. You know, they will return that kind of favor through the work that they do. So yes, John, exceptionally important. You can have workplaces that are so depressive I mean, you would rather want to jump out of the window, you know. So yeah, no, valid point, really valid. And one can, you know, you have different ways of asking questions, and what be important for those people, they can tell you.
Yeah, so I think that also then brings in, if you look at it, the smokers now, a person that smokes, let's say, has may have a particular personality style and is used to talk to others over a cigarette, and you know, as non-smokers, we may not appreciate that, would be the polite way of putting it. But putting in place putting a spot in place which is conducive to communication for those people. And again, I think what I'm hearing from you is, unfortunately, people are not all cookie cutters. We're all different. We all have our different little quirks, and what works for me doesn't work for you, or doesn't work for another person. So again, the dynamics of an organization and putting in place a garden, or just addressing the smokers, or a water fountain where there's water available and two people can have a chat, those are important aspects of the office space. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that. I'm saying, you know, if you go to the Kruger Park, it's one of the examples I also often use. You know, you see impala. It's one of the most beautiful animals on earth. And then you turn the corner, there's 50 more. You turn another corner, there's 150. Then you turn a corner, there's 30 more, and so on. And the next morning when you leave camp, there are a lot of impalas outside, but you don't see them anymore. And the reason for that is they're all the same. You just don't see that they're part of the furniture. You're looking for something that's different. And the thing about human beings, as you know, every person is an endangered species, and no one is the same. So in a work environment, when you look at those kind of things that would work for people, it will differ. Just making a garden outside for people to sit does not mean it's going to work for all people, you know. And having that potential variety, again, will make people feel we are being seen. It's such an important thing. So yes, the differences should be cherished.
Yeah, I think that's important. So going back a bit, what have we got in the way of questions here? Let's see, we've got a couple of questions up on my screen. Any difference in responses from your clients in working in healthcare versus in other roles as such?
Usually, yes. At the moment, I would say the resilience that's broken down is so spread that distinction is not necessarily that wide or that definite. But any occupation that's working with humans and kind of being in a helping role can burn people out immensely. And the reason I'm saying that, we find this with psychologists, we find it with ambulance workers, with doctors, and all those people, nurses and so on, is because you have what we refer to as vicarious trauma. That's the onlooker trauma. So the person is traumatized, and you as the worker sees the trauma, so you get vicariously traumatized. So that's an additional trauma that you're getting. So that would make those health workers more susceptible to burnout than normal. It's just nowadays, because the resilience is so low everywhere, that it's difficult to make the distinction. But normally we do, yes.
Right, I've got two questions here I'd like to pose. One is one that maybe we can put it up on the web. What are some of the good trauma dealing practices? Would you recommend practices as in how you do it, as opposed to maybe people? Would you recommend trauma release therapy?
There are many
different. The second, linking to that, I think similar question, but in the same, what are the simple ways in which I can proactively increase resilience? So maybe those two are linked. Maybe not.
Yeah. Again, we have a saying that certain psychotherapies for certain people under certain conditions. If you have something that works for you, like TRE or trauma release energy, and it works for you, do it. If you have something like Pilates that works for you, do it. Yoga, do it. Running, riding your bicycle, do it. Anything that you feel can contribute. The type of psychotherapy that we do that's referred to as SHIP, or spontaneous healing intrasystemic process, allows those incomplete feelings, those ones that stuck, to complete. In other words, we create an environment where the internal wisdom of the system is allowed to do what it does best, because we normally keep it from doing that. But there are other psychotherapies. One is called somatic experiencing. It's also a really good psychotherapy. There's prolonged exposure method. So if there is something that you feel that kind of works for you, do it. Be careful. I said it earlier. Be careful at this stage of toxic positivity, because that's denying very often what you are feeling, and that is bad news. All right. There's nothing wrong with positive thinking, putting it on your fridge saying today is a good day. There's nothing wrong with that, but not at the expense of something it needs to complete in your system so that you can build resilience. What is it that that person asked that he or she can do to increase resilience? Anything that works. Anything that works that has to do with self-care, self-nurturing, kindness to self will do the trick. Anything, as much of that as you possibly can, that is not strenuous. If normally you're a jogger, but now jogging is depleting you, rather walk, don't jog. Because we find that people's psychobiological systems are so sensitive post-COVID, and those who've had COVID and other things, that they will go into severe psychobiological diseases. And we've not seen this amount of people struggling with what we call end-state sicknesses, severe diseases. So be careful not to push yourself beyond the limits of what you would normally do. Don't try and do better than your previous best. That's not a good idea. The 25% that kind of floats through life, they can do it. But the 75% should not do it. Don't try and improve your best. Just be with what you can do at this stage. Really important, because people are getting heart attacks and all kinds of things because they're doing what they normally do, pushing themselves, and then they end up in a really, really bad place.
Okay, last question and a very quick answer because we're running out of time. Any ideas in social support, as in friends, family, I guess clubs and social clubs, as a contributing factor to resilience?
Yeah. Family, friends, exceptionally important. Even people at work can be really important. Those relationships often have a nurturing value to them. Avoid those ones who really take you down into the dumps, There's nothing wrong with saying to a friend, listen, I'm really not feeling good. This COVID is pushing me down, or the COVID PTSD is pulling me down, and sharing that. But going deep down into the pits and just you get some of those people, they just can't stop. Better to avoid them. But your social gatherings is one of the best ways to go against that thing that we call isolation. That's such a bad thing that can actually exacerbate the effect of a low resilience. So some social relationships rejuvenates us, and we should pick them out and we should nurture them. They are really, really important to us.
Right. I'm going to stop there. We're just in time, I think, sort of, a couple of minutes. First of all, thank you very much, Dr. Joe. To anyone who wants to see this again, or to share it with friends, work colleagues, or anyone else, I think it's invaluable. I think it was absolutely wonderful. and certainly allows everyone to have a sort of look at themselves as to what's going on. And I think in the design of offices and facilities, providing that peace spot and looking at the layout so that we increase the level of peace, or allow that, and allow people to work in different places, different environments. People are all different, and even the same person is different on different days. So we need to acknowledge that. And I think that that's one of the big messages is that's come out as well, is that everybody's different, and we need to acknowledge that and support people. But thank you very much. Thanks to Marianne and Secha for setting this up, and Marianne for passing on the introduction, and thank you very much. And I think that everyone on the call and everyone else in SAFMA and South African Facilities Management, you can give yourself a pat on the back. You're part of FM excellence globally, as recognized, and what Dr. Joe's brought in to us as SAFMA is we've just taken you out of, you were nicely in your comfort zone. We've just taken you out, and hopefully we've just put you back, allowed you to put yourself back in your comfort zone. So thank you very much. And with that, I think we'll just sign off. Thank you, Dr. Joe.
Thank you. Thank you for the
opportunity, everybody. Marianne, are we still live or have we gone off?